So what causes an identity crisis? What is the things that begins to push us in ways that the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about others, the way that we think about ourselves in relationship to God begins to change because of that? And so last week we began to look at this, and we said a lot of this happens that when we have misinformation. And so we looked at this and we started talking about how this is, because when you start to question who is God, and when you start to question who is God, ultimately the trickle-down effect of that is you start to question, who am I? And then after that, you begin to go, what is the best way to live? And there's kind of a domino effect that begins to take place. So what we've done is we're going to look at the ancient story, and we want to talk about not like the particulars scientifically of this ancient story, but like what's the story's meaning? What is the story's value? And how can that influence me as I begin to look at this? And so what we found out last week is there was this idea in Genesis in the garden. And we also said, we go, I don't think snakes can talk. And I want to tell you that I don't think the people that Moses was telling thought snakes could talk either. I don't think that's a thing. But there's still lessons that we learn from this. And the serpent thing attacked Eve, and not with venom and not with fangs. The serpent attacked Eve with ideas, questions. Did God really say? Is that what God really said? It wasn't like he was trying to venom her. He was trying to play with her head and play with her heart and begin into the process of questioning, because what we talked about last week is if the enemy of your heart and of your life can begin to have you buy into a deceptive idea, just an idea, that's how dangerous sometimes those can be, and begin to have your desires distorted and begin to have destructive behavior, then ultimately your life will turn into chaos. It'll come into chaos. Now, that may not like make your calendar chaos, but it'll make the way that you think about yourself and the way that you think about God and the way that you structure how you're going to live and what's the best way to live and what's the best way to work and what's the best way to raise your family. It will toss that all into chaos. So, we talked about that last week. Who is God? And that first domino determines our answers for most of the majority of our life questions, because it determines what and who will be the ultimate authority in my life, which will determine who I am. So all of us have been working on this since we were born. We've all been developing our mental maps. We've been mapping out how we think about certain things, how we process certain things. So from a young age, if you touch something that was hot that came out of the oven, all of a sudden you made a map and you go, I'm going to mark that on my map so that I know the next time I get close to that, I go, oh, I'm going to get a pot holder. I didn't like the way that went the last time. And so we begin to get maps about ourselves all throughout our lives. We'll start to figure out and we go, okay, I'm athletic, so I'm going to do these things. Or if you put on your mental map, I'm not athletic. Anytime someone says, hey, you want to go out and play? You go, nope. I looked at my map and it says, no, that's not something I do. It happened to you in music. Some of you can sing. Some of you this morning I was watching you and you're like, blah, 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 blah. Why? Somebody in elementary school looked at you and said, and so you marked on that in your map and you said, no, that's not for me, right? Others of you, it can be, all kinds of different things. Some of you were told you were smart. Some of you were told you were not smart. And so when, there's conversations that take place, you go, I'm going to check out of this conversation. I don't think I can be a part of this. Why? Because you've been mapping your life and how you view about yourself for such a long time. Now, the problem with this, and we all do it, it's not like this is, but there is a dark side of this, is because we all take in, right now they say we take in about 10,000 messages of information every day. And we throw that all into these maps. Now, here's what I know, and you know this too. Not all 10,000 messages are impactful. But because we get so many messages every day now, whether it's ads, social media, conversations, talking, YouTube, TikTok, whatever it is, we no longer choose the information that sticks on our maps based off of like what is the most truthful. We choose them based off of the ones we like the most and the ones that are the most persuasive, not what's most true. So we find stuff, and isn't it true? You can say something like, broccoli or something, and then 2 days later, what happens on your social media feed? Why am I getting an ad for broccoli, right? Like, you look at all these kinds of things, and so we find out that it's not that what's most truthful impacts us. It's what we like the most. It's what we agree with the most. that has the biggest impact on us. Blaise Pascal, who was a mathematician, he was a philosopher, he was a theologian in the mid-17th century. He said it this way. He said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. It's not what's true, it's what you like. So this is what most marketing strategies are based around, isn't it? Why do you buy what you buy? And it's also the way that political campaigns work. True, isn't it? And so when we look at this, we see that, Instagram in particular has this particular marketing style like this where we find that if we can influence, it doesn't have to be true, but if we can influence and if it begins to fit into how we've mapped out our world and it begins to be something we like, then we'll buy into it, which is where we picked up and left off last week in this story that we find in Genesis. Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. I want to pick up where we left off last week. Genesis 3, verse 7. It says, then the eyes of both of them were opened. Adam and Eve, they were open. And they realized that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. So here's what happened. Their mental map that they had about who they were in relationship to God, what God made them for, who they were, and their relationship to the garden, their work, their ethic, their value, all of those things had now been twisted and distorted. And they believed that God now was going to approach them in a certain way because of the distortion, because now they experienced something new, guilt and shame. And isn't it true, guilt and shame impacts the way you think God thinks about you. It's no different than the way that Adam and Eve were. And so from that time, they tried to compensate those feelings of guilt and shame. They compensate the feelings of guilt and shame with covering up, hiding, and we've been doing that ever since. When we sin, we cover up, we hide, we don't tell, we keep secrets. We don't want to do that. And so when we listen to how this all plays out, the Apostle Paul writes into this. He says that once you get into that mental map where you go, oh gosh, I need to keep pulled back, I need to hide, I need to keep out of, I need to stay away. What happens is you've rewired your brain. And your mental map now needs to be rewired, and you need to be pulled aside and corrected. You ever been pulled aside and corrected? Maybe as a coach pulled you aside and they corrected you. I remember one of the worst times I was pulled aside. I was on a youth and mission trip. I was heading to overseas for a couple months, and I'm in California. I'm in Southern California for training. And they were trying to explain to us like a global food problem. And so they put like 80% of the people got like, or like 5% of the people got like a nice meal, 10% of the people had like a McDonald's type meal, and then for the other 80%, they made all this spaghetti and threw it in the trash can to try to use an illustration for like how to do world food hunger. Well, I thought that was dumb. So I was like, because I was in like the peasant group, so I was like, forget that. They just put clean trash cans in. Let's go grab it out of there and eat it. And I was like, we'll fight. And I started like a little mini revolt with all these university students. And then I had someone pull me aside and tell me how arrogant and blah, blah, blah I was and all of this, and I was embarrassed. And so it was one of those moments where I realized, I don't know everything. I mean, maybe when you were 18 or 19, you were like me, but yes, I do. And you found out, oh, no, I don't. And so this is the kind of word that the Apostle Paul uses in Romans chapter 12. He says, therefore I urge you. The word urge is I need to pull you aside. You've acted like an idiot. Your thinking is so screwed up that you actually think you're justified and right in this moment. And I need to pull you aside. The way that a coach pulls a player aside and goes, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? He says, I need to urge you. in view of God's mercies, that you need to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your act of worship. And the phrase in view is something we always need to keep in the forefront of our mind because it's a living sacrifice. And he says, God is asking you to make sacrifices. God is asking you to make sacrifices in the way that you live, in how you live. So do not conform. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so there's two words that I want to spend a little bit of time on here quickly, and we got a lot to go through today. Conform versus transform. Conform versus transform. So conformed is very passive, right? So if you take water and you pour it into a cup, doesn't matter what shape the cup is, that water will conform to the shape of the cup. That's very, very passive. It transformed is very, very active. And the New Testament says this, do not copy the behavior of the world. Don't copy it. Don't conform. Don't just have the water go into the shape of the cup and go, well, it is what it is. You just can't help it. That's what our culture says now. That's what our culture does now. He goes, that's very like passive. That's mindless. That's unintentional. Paul's saying, I want you to be transformed and changed. That's deliberate. That's active. That's renew. That's restore. That's like Chip and Joanna Gaines. I need you to have a little fixer-upper in your life. Don't just accept the way that it is. There's some things that need to be torn out and some new things that need to be put in. And he says, you can be conformed or you can be transformed, but make no mistake, you're going to be formed. You will be formed. And it's going to be either active or it's going to be passive. But in the midst of this, you will be transformed. There's no way you can escape that. So you can either be intentional about it or you can just say, well, that's just kind of how things are. And so spiritual formation is a Christian term for growing and becoming more like Jesus. However, it's not just a religious thing, it's a human thing. And science will tell us how this happened, and it relates to our mental maps. Neuroscience is just fascinating to me. I mean, this week I was talking to Adam, and we were talking about an article Stanford wrote this week about free will and how all of these kinds of things begins to play into this, and that it's not just a religious thing, but because for centuries science has been exploring the connection between your mind, your body, and your soul. And your mind and my mind is what we have, that's our thoughts, right? Your mind, your body is what takes, place on your physical side of life, and then your soul is what takes place on the inside. And we said there's like some sort of hierarchy to this, and there's little to no debate that predominantly our bodies are controlled by our central nervous system, right? Tell your right hand to move right now. Neat, huh? Pretty cool. So our brain has this element where we have a central nervous system that's designed to move into our bodies. And so the way that we think and we move and, I'm looking left now, I'm looking right, and we begin to do this. And so the question is, does our thoughts control the brain, or does the brain control the mind? Now, just a few decades ago, most scientific thought that the brain was fixed, it was hardwired, and that it couldn't be changed. And then fairly recently, there was two discoveries. One was about neuroplasticity, the other one was about neurogenesis. Neuroplasticity was discovered in 1948. And in 1948, it was the ability of physical matter in the brain to change continuously during an individual's life, that the matter in your brain can change throughout your lifetime. Then neurogenesis comes along in 1998, and it's this. Every day, your brain, your body generates new moldable brain cells. This means your brain changes on a regular basis, and the primary shaper of your brain is not your environment, it's not your food, it's not your substance, it's your thoughts. So Dr. Caroline Leaf says this: our mind was designed to control our body, of which our brain is a part, not the other way around. Matter does not control us. We control matter, the matter in our brain. We control matter, our brain matter, through our thinking and our choosing. And our thoughts actually change the physical nature of our brains. It creates new networks. It changes the gray matter that takes place in our net. It strengthens or weakens synapses on how our brains fire based off of particular decisions that we begin to make. Our thoughts and our DNA, there's scientific proof that it even shapes the way that we think about ourselves and the way we think others think about ourselves. And what it does is it creates scientific proof for how generational sin impacts you. And there's consensus that our mind is literally over matter. Harvard did a study a couple years ago with the American Medical Association. It says stress is a major contributor of 75% of all illnesses, according to Harvard. So what's the primary cause of stress? Negative thinking. It obstructs our natural healing capacities. So you and I have repetitive thoughts, right? Physical, functional, structural thoughts, and our body has reflexivity. So I started thinking about what are reflexive things that I do that I don't even realize I'm aware of. I'm not proud of these, but these are just something I do. If I'm watching, I don't know, let's say, a football game on TV, and there's a commercial. Do you know what I found I do? Not even thinking about it? Also notice that I do that at red lights. Am I consciously thinking about it? No, it's patterned in my life now. It's reflexive. And so when we begin to think about these reflective habits and lights in our life, it means that the ruler of your mind is the ruler of your life. And so what rules in your mind will take hold will ultimately determine the direction of your life. It will ultimately determine who you are. And the difference between developing healthy habits and life-giving habits and wholeness and flourishing as an individual and destructive patterns that lead to addiction, brokenness, and eventual ruin all begins with the ideas that we put into our mind that begin to form us. So all that science, the Apostle Paul, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, the Apostle Paul would look at us right now and he would go, told you so. Told you. You just said it way more complicated than I did. King Solomon also told us the exact same thing in Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7. He said, as a man thinks in his heart, not feels, so is he. Which is why I think Jesus came as a rabbi, as a teacher, and not a political force or a political change agent or a military leader. Because he understood he came as an informational guide, developing our mental maps, because he knew that if we could know the truth, then it would be that truth in the way that we think about ourselves, we think about our Heavenly Father, and we think about one another, that would set us free. And the danger is, for you and for I, some of us are enslaved to certain ways of thinking. Maybe you were told, you'll never be good at this. Maybe you think, I always mess up relationships. Maybe you think, they'll never change. I'll never change. And these statements at first seem rather benign, right? They don't seem that bad. But somewhere along the line, if you pick up the idea that you're unlovable, now it's become a part of your mental map. Now it becomes a part of who you are. And it begins to have it. And what happens is there's repetitive behavior that takes place, and it begins to shape your behavior. And now not only do you think I'm unlovable, you now act like someone who's unlovable. Could be outburst, or it could be you just have come to accept it. And what you knew as a young person, that's just not true. You've now, over time, it's been shaped and formed, where it's now become true. And so we get around this and we think now in our culture, where we live, maybe I just need to get a new lifestyle, right? Maybe I need to get a new home. Maybe I just need to move. Maybe I need a new car. Maybe I need a new job. Maybe I need a new spouse. Maybe I need to change my appearance by going to the gym or trying a new diet or getting some new clothes or, having surgery. I don't know what it is. And in a moment, there is instant satisfaction in those moments. But the problem is it's just a temporary distraction. Because no matter where you move or what you're driving or where you work, the problem is old you's still there. And it's going to catch up with you. And that's why these external transformations do not work. Because you know this, we don't change from the outside, we change from the inside. And there's two opposing forces that we have going against us in our heads, in our mind. One we talked about last week. There's a force that wants to try to plant ideas in your mind about you and about others and about relationships designed to kill, steal, and destroy. And it'll create chaos in those. Those are destructive behaviors. There's another force that we call the way, the truth, and the life. And Jesus has told us he wants us to live life to the fullest. The Apostle Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. He says, so here's what you need to do if you want to live your life to the fullest. Take every thought, not behavior, take every thought captive and hold it obedient to Christ. Because you're going to be formed. There's forming, whether you think it or not. There's passive and there's active. And you can either be enslaved to unreality or you can be empowered by truth. So who's the ruler of your mind? Well, who are you reading? Who are you podcasting? What shows are you binging? Who are you following? Who are you scrolling? What are you liking? What are your primary thought influencers? Who do you exchange ideas with and debate with? What are the dominant voices in your life? Where are you learning the most dominant messages in your life? And what are the voices and messaging in your life that's created chaos and destruction, and they've provided you a mental map that you've carried into adulthood? Because here's what's at stake if we don't take an active role in the formation. It looks like a grown man who's grew up achievement-driven. He was achievement-driven in his household and his job, and now he believes, I'm only as good as I am successful at work, but work's about ready to end. He's about ready to retire, and now he doesn't know who he is. Looks like a grown woman who's a perfectionist. Her mother taught her that she has to be all things, keep it together at all times, just look at, and now just to be accepted by others, but now she's not even acceptable to herself. She's lost herself. She doesn't even know who she is. It's like a young man who grew up without a dad or maybe had an abusive dad. And now he believes I could never be good enough to be a dad. I'd never deserve love and affection because of that. Maybe it's a young woman who constantly compares herself to what she sees on social media and constantly believes I'm undesirable. I'm not worthy of love. Because these influences, these influencers, have shaped what you think and what you think about yourself. And fundamentally, it's helped you shape what you've been shaped into. And so this is why this question of who am I is not able to separate from who is God. More specifically, who is your God? Because who you have set up as the ultimate authority of your life will ultimately determine your identity. Because over and over time, we begin to process all of this information, and it has become the final word in there. It defines our social status. It defines our construct. It defines our relationship. It defines what we think we can and cannot do. And some of you have been held captive for so long, you look at something and go, I can't do that. I'm not capable of doing that. Some of it has created some residence in some of the most prime real estate in your head. Your self-talk is just off the rails. This is why we've been talking over the last few weeks that you and I were made for more. We're made for more than that. So what if you begin to feed your mind differently? Because neuroplasticity would say that can change. Neurogenesis says there's even new brain cells and things that are forming in your mind, and you can begin to change the way that you think. What if you began to rewire your brain based off of what God thinks, not what all the other 10,000 messages you get a day is? And what if you began to carve out the voices in your head, the very voice that Eve heard that said this? It was a destructive idea. And it came along to Eve and said, did God really say to not eat the fruit? Did God really say you couldn't touch the fruit? Is that what God really said? You and I have probably never had a fruit problem. Here's the problem that we have, that we hear the little voice in our head. Did God really say you could be loved? Did God really say you were lovable? What we're going to do this morning is help rewire that mapping. Because you know what he said? Yes, he did. God said that. God said you're loved. Did God really say you're forgiven? Did he really say that? I mean, after all you've done, and how badly you screwed it up, and how badly a mess you made of that again. Did God really say you were forgiven? Did he really say that? Yes, he did. God really said you were forgiven. Well, did God really say that you're a new creation? I mean, the past is really gone. I mean, in the old you, because you know who you were. You know what you did. You know what happened in high school. You know what happened in college. You know what happened in your 20s and 30s. You know about that business deal. You know about that. You know you're always susceptible to this. You know you're always susceptible to that. Did God really say that you're a new creation? We've got to rewire the brain to go, yep, he did. Did God really say that you were free of the guilt and the shame of your past? Did God really say that you were free? Or did he just say he forgot? Nope. God said you were free. Did God really say you could overcome your hurts, your habits, your hang-ups? Did God really say that you'd be able to back down from those? Or are you just going to take a time out from some of those things for a while? But they're never going to go away, right? You're never going to be able to overcome them. Did God really say you could overcome it? And that needs to be rewired, because that's exactly what God said. Did God really say you were valuable? Did God really say it was possible for you to have a hope and a future? Knowing what's happened? Knowing how it happened? Is that what God really said? He did. God really said that. And as we went to last week, when God becomes the ultimate authority in your life on what is true, then the truest things that could ever be spoken about your past and my past are what God said. Now, there's an enemy to your life and to my life that wants to have you believe otherwise. But you have to determine, is what God says about me true? Because if you believe that, then that will ultimately determine who you are. And this is why last week we spent so much time looking about who is God. Because if you believe God is the ultimate authority in your life, then what he says about you is true. And that makes you and I made for more. So today, we want to close out the service today, and we're going to sing another song together to end together today. And I want you to know we've got these bracelets that we've been handing out every week, made for more. And yes, I'm aware last week we ran out. And so we've got some more here today. And what we want to do is maybe today you just need to realize you were made for more, because you begin to question, did God really say? Did God really say? He did. He did. You can. He will. So today, maybe you need to write that on a prayer and pin it to the cross. And as always, we're just humbled to pray with you on those each and every week about some stuff that your mental map is all messed up. I mean, it's just a mess because you just have so much doubt, confusion. I mean, it's just a hot mess. It doesn't have to stay that way. But you do need to have some formation take place in your mind. And some of you have just been doing passive. It's just the way it is. I mean, it's just the way it is. Some of you need to move into transform. You need to be a little bit more active about it. Because the rule of your mind will ultimately be the rule of your heart. And the rule of your heart is where you will speak, live, and act. So today, maybe you need to take communion, bring it back to your chair, and peel back the layer, and take the bread and the cup, and remember that you were made for more. Maybe today you need to light a candle because there's just been some thoughts in your mind. Some of you have some thoughts in your mind that need to get an eviction notice because you've believed things about yourself for far too long that just aren't true. Oh, you don't understand. Let me tell you my story. This was true. Okay, what was the word you just said? Was true. Okay, then it's time. You can change. Some of you are so frustrated with addiction, you can change. It can change. Some of you are so frustrated with the way when you look in the mirror every day, what you think about yourself, it can change. But you also need to have God be the ruler of your thoughts. You need to get active about that. So we're going to sing, and you're going to be free to respond at all the different stations today. And I just pray that you would just realize that you were made for more. Can I pray with you, Father, today? There's an enemy who wants to just destroy my thoughts and plant destructive ideas and get me thinking and believing things that just aren't true. And then you've come so that we can have life and have life more abundantly, to give me life and to show me the way and help me in the way that I live, the way that I think, and the way that I relate and talk to others. But God, I need to get active about that. Because passivity will just help me be slave and captive to the 10,000 messages, and then I'm just going to start to choose the ones I believe and the ones I don't believe. But God, today you have said things about me and about us that oftentimes we go, but did God really say, did God really mean that about my stuff, about my junk, about my past, about my abuse, about my addiction, about my hurt, about what happened to me in this story and that story? And he did. That you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So God, would you renew our mind today? As we sing songs to you and about you, we love you. Amen.
Hey there, and thanks for joining us today online. If you loved what you experienced today and you're local to Kankakee County, we'd love to invite you back for our in-person worship services. You can visit GatheringPoint.church anytime for more information. We hope to see you soon.